Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Noah. I'm the consumer tech guide at the Tech Hub, which is a partnership between Jewish Senior Life and the Rochester Institute of Technology to provide technological assistance to the residents at the summit at Brighton. And I'm going to be giving a presentation today about password security. So let's get that pulled up here. Okay. All right, you should be seeing the presentation on your screens now. And this educational event is being sponsored by the Claire and Jerry Rotenberg Institute on Aging at Jewish Senior Life. The Institute strives to be the hub of knowledge and innovation to promote all aspects of positive aging. And with that, let's begin. So we're going to be talking today about password security. And I'm sure to some extent you've heard of password security. It's very much talked about sometimes in the news, but especially when you're signing up for an email account or you're trying to make a Netflix account, you try to put your password in and it says, oh, it's not secure enough. You need to make it longer or add some letters in or something. So we're going to talk all about that. We're going to learn a little bit more on what that means and why it's important. So let's look first at our objectives. Our first objective is going to be talking about what is password security. So we're what can you define it as, or at least how I would define it? The second aspect is why is password security important? That is going to be the nitty-gritty, a little bit into the weeds about what is actually happening with your password and why is it secure. And then finally, we're going to talk about how we can be more conscious about our passwords. How can we protect ourselves better? But let's start off with what does password security mean? And to me, it can be broken down into 3 rules. And if you want to write these down, you can. They're going to be very simple, but I'm going to expand upon them further later in the presentation. The first rule is you should not reuse passwords for multiple websites. This is not very intuitive, and it's going to affect the ease of use of your passwords, especially. I know a lot of people, especially residents that I've worked with, have found it much easier if they use one password. They'll remember it easier and they'll be able to use it and be able to get into their accounts much easier without having to reference other things. But this is very, very bad for security. And the password that's most important for this aspect is your email. So make sure that if you take nothing else away from this, I would say make sure that your email password is different than your other passwords. And we'll expand on that further in a minute. But the second rule is going to be when you're creating a password, the aspects to make it secure is its uniqueness, number 1, its length, number 2, and its complexity. And often when you're making a password, you might see a little box here that you can see on the screen. It will say something along the lines of, your password should have 8 characters and it should include a letter, a lowercase letter, an uppercase letter, a number, or a character. And again, we're going to talk about that later and why that's important. And then the last rule is you shouldn't be sharing your password with strangers. That's like if you get a call from Microsoft or a call from Amazon, you get a text message, you get an email, somebody saying, oh, there's an issue with your account. Can you please send us your password so we can verify your identity? Never do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But there's almost no case in which, actually, I'm going to say there is no case that anybody would be able to ask for your password and be able to verify it, unless it's like a very, very small company that's local with like a few people as employees. No corporation is going to be able to ask for your password as a form of identity. But let's continue on and let's get more into the weeds of why you shouldn't reuse passwords. So the way that I like to think about it is that passwords are like keys. So like your house key, your car key, if you have a safety deposit box or a PO box, keys for like those can be allegories for what passwords are like. But the important thing is the stronger your password is, makes the stronger the lock is that matches with your key. So if you're using a password like just password, that's like making a key where you haven't even cut it yet. And every single person who's going to try to open your lock is going to, the first thing they're going to try is a key that has no cut in it, because any key can pretty much open that. It's pretty much saying that there's no security at all. But if you were to use a randomized password like this one here, that makes it a very complex key. So almost nobody's going to be able to guess what it is unless they've seen it themselves before or have very advanced techniques to try to recreate your key. And I do want to put a caveat here, which is I don't think all accounts need the same level of security. So if you have your email address, which I said was an important one, and we're going to touch a little bit on in a minute, or like your bank or Amazon or any website that has your payment information, you should be securing those quite well. But if we're talking about a account for if you're in a bowling league and you can log in and see what your score was in the last meet, then I don't think you should be securing that like it's Fort Knox. The amount of security, I think, can be combined with the level of personal information or financial risk that is related to that account. So just keep that in mind, and that will make it a little bit easier when you're creating your passwords. But the higher importance that the account has, the higher security you can match your password to. But furthermore, the main point that we're talking about here is why you shouldn't make all your passwords the same. And that's going to combine a little bit like this ideology on passwords being like keys. So if all of your belongings, your car, your house, if you have a safe in your house with personal documents, imagine if all those were locked by the same key. So if you dropped your key and lost it, or somebody else like made a copy of your key without you knowing about it, normally they would only be able to get access just to your house if they're trying to rob you, or just your car. But if all of your locks are the same, they could get into your safe and steal your social security number, maybe even your identity. They could steal your car, they could steal your house. That'd be like the same if somebody got into your email account and had the same password as everything else. They could get into your bank, they could get into Amazon, they could make orders for items without you knowing about it, and all this different stuff. So that's why I think it's very important that you use different passwords for different accounts. And that's what I was talking about there with if like you don't want a criminal to be able to get access to everything. But even more than that, the way that criminals find passwords is going to be also related to your passwords being used for similar accounts. And so here's this website here. It's called haveibeenpwned.com. If you want to write it down, you can. This is a website that talks a little bit about personal data breaches. So this is like, for an example, Target a few years ago, I think around 2014, had an event where they got hacked. And the way that it happened was that they had a AC company, a heating and like air conditioning company, that had access to Target's internal servers, just so that they could monitor the temperatures of stores. So they wanted to make sure that customers were comfortable. And to do that, this company had access to all the Target stores so that they can make sure that the temperature was at a good temperature. But what ended up happening is that a criminal hacked into this company, the heating and air conditioning company, and they were able to use that company as a pivot to get into Target. And once they were in Target, they were able to steal 40 million credit card and debit card numbers. So that's why when we're talking about a data breach, we're talking about there's some sort of event that happened that led to millions or tens of millions of like either credit cards, email addresses, your personal information like your name and address, or passwords being exposed. And that's how hackers are going to start trying to like get into your accounts. So I'm going to open up this website real quick. Ignore that first pop-up. And so here's what this website looks like. And it's a very straightforward website. So what you can do is you can put in an email address. So if I put in, for example, my email address for work here, you can check if it's been exposed in any data breaches. Has any hacker found like a website or something where you have an account and was your password included with it? And we can see for my work email here that it's good and there's no issues with it. But if I were to put in, this is an email I don't use anymore. I think I made it when I was 7 years old. So like close to the year 2004, 2005 or something. And this password, we can see if we check, it was found in 2 data breaches. And that means that email account could potentially have its password exposed to the extent that somebody would be able to break into my email account. Excuse me. And we can see here, this was part of a breach where 458 million email accounts were exposed in December of 2016. So if you want to, you can go here and check if your email account has been exposed, and if your password hasn't been changed since that exposure, you may want to go and change it. But also we can look at pwned passwords, and pwned again being something that was exposed or stolen by a criminal and made public. And what we want to do here is, I wouldn't recommend putting your password in, but we can see like generally what it means that like if you're using an insecure password. So the classic example that people think of when they think of an insecure password is the word password. So if we try just putting that in here, we can see how many times somebody used the word password as their password and how many times that became public information of somebody stole it and made it public. And we can see that has happened almost 9.5 million times. So if you think about it, there's how many people in the United States? So like 350 million. So imagine if of those 350 million people, 10 million of those people used password as their password. So that's getting close to like, we're even like 3% of the population of the United States has had this password used and exposed in some way such that their information is at risk, whether it's their personal information, financial information, medical information. So that's why you would really don't want to use passwords that are common or easy to, like very easy to come up with. And like other examples with that is, I know a lot of people use passwords that like include their name and like their year that they're born or something like that. So if we just use like a random example, Mary 1952, and we check if that password's been used before, and it has. It's not nearly as many times, but if it's happened at all, it makes it significantly more likely that a hacker, if there's some sort of data exposure where your account is included, can get into your account if it's something that's been used before. It's a little bit complex on how they can do that, but just know that if it's been used before, it's very easy for a hacker to be able to reverse engineer it if it gets exposed and get access to that account. And I would say it's not as likely to happen with just general people, But if you're like an employee at a company, or if you're like known in like a celebrity, then you'd be much more at risk. So we're a little bit less at risk just because we are like, there's no record of us being like what famously wealthy or anything like that. But just know there is an increased risk if you're reusing a password or you're using a password that somebody else has used in the past. And that would include stuff with names, with years. Like a lot of people like to use the date that they got married. So just think about any dates included in a password can increase the amount of risk of it being exposed. But let's get back to the presentation. And I mentioned this a few times before, but the most important password that you have and the most important part of your online identity or information include like connected to you is going to be your email address. And that's for a few reasons. And the first one is going to be a lot of your passwords are linked to your email address. So if you've ever tried to reset a password in the past, you'll notice that a lot of the time they'll say, we're going to send you something to your email address. And that is how we're going to identify you. And that's what makes it extremely bad if somebody gets access into your email. So if you either have like a weak password or the password you used for your email was used for something else, a lot of times hackers will do something called credential stuffing, which is they'll like if, for example, your account with Amazon gets hacked and it says your email is johnsmith@google.com, and then they have the password that you use for Amazon, they're going to go to Google and try that same password they found for Amazon to see if they can get into your email account. And it's because once they get access, they can get into all of your accounts. So it's very important that your email account is secure. And that's why I said at the start, if you take nothing else away from today, I think it's very important that you try to keep your email account secure. That's the most important part of your online identity. Another reason why they want to get into your email account is that sometimes, I'm included, some people will use email to transfer personal information. So that's like sending emails to family members with like their addresses, dates of birth, their names, or even like social security numbers or more like medical information. You don't want that type of stuff being exposed. So you should also try to not use that, or you can send that in an email. Email is pretty safe, but you want to make sure your account is secure. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about trust, which is not something that people really like pair with an email address. And that there's two things we're going to talk about for this. The first one is if I am an employee for a company, let's say Amazon.com, there's no way for me to verify your identity unless I can use some information that I have when you created your Amazon account. And the biggest piece of information that I can use is your email address. Your email address is very much connected to your identity when it comes to businesses and anything to do with the internet, because there's no way for me to say, like, check an ID card and say, oh, this is you. The email address is what is used to identify you as a person for a vast majority of your online life. The second part of the trust here is trust between people. And here's a short story that I just experienced, I'd say a few weeks ago. There's a resident that I worked with who they didn't have their email address exposed, but one of their friends did. And that the email address that got exposed from their friend, the attacker or the hacker or whoever you want to call them, went through and messaged everybody that had communications with that person who had their account exposed, which included the resident. And they went through and said, oh, I'm in a really big spot of trouble. I have a family member who has stage 3 cancer, and I'm trying to buy a gift for them so that they can like have a more pleasant time in the hospital, but my credit card payment's not going through. So can you please purchase this for me? And so the resident thought it was legitimate. It was coming from one of their friends as far as they were concerned, and they went through and made the purchase. So having your email exposed doesn't just endanger yourself, but it also puts at risk other people, people in your family and your friends, because there's a level of trust that's tied to your email account where you believe it's that person when you receive a communication from that account. So just keep that in mind. And again, that's why you want to keep your email account secure and make sure that nobody else can have access to it without your consent. All right, next, we're going to talk about how to be more security conscious. And we're going to start that off with how to make a secure password. So the first thing that we talked about was complexity and length for a password. And those are like really easy words to look at, but the real question is what do those mean? So I'm just going to bring up a little thing to write on right here. And we're going to talk about password complexity. So if I had a password that was 1 character long, but we don't know what that character is, how many different combinations could you reach to get to that password? That is what you can define as password complexity. And so a lot of the times we see that your password needs to be 8 characters long and include numbers, include letters, include special characters. So why is they asking for all these different things? And the reason why is that the more things that you include, the harder it is to get to your password because there's more combinations. So for our password that has a length of 1, if it's just numbers, it means that there's only 10 different combinations of what that password could be. It's any number. If we start including letters, we have now added another 26 different combinations of what that one password can be, that password of the length of 1. But now if we add capital letters, we're just adding another 26 different combinations. So now we're at 62 different things that this 1 character password can be. And then once you start adding symbols, that's when it starts getting quite difficult to try to guess that password in a timely manner, because now we're over 90 different possible combinations of what this 1 character can be. So complexity is how many different things can you have for each character of your password, each letter, and then length will start multiplying that. So instead of having a password with a length of 1, if you have a password with a length of 12, and every single, we don't know what the password is, but if each individual letter can be a number, a lowercase letter, an uppercase letter, a special character, it's going to take so long to try to guess what the password is that it's not even worth trying for an attacker. This does go out the window, though, if your password was reused and you're something that you're using multiple times and it gets exposed. And so that's why we're also talking about uniqueness. But we're going to do a little bit of a real look into why complexity and length are important with a little bit of an example here. So I have 2 passwords on the screen. One is very short. It's 8 characters long, and it's just zeros, the letter A twice, 1 lowercase, 1 uppercase, and then 1 symbol, the exclamation point. And the other password is almost twice as long. It's 15 numbers, but nothing else. It's just numbers. and I want you guys to try to think for a second, what password do you think is more difficult to try to like guess than the other? And actually, this is quite close, but the first password is only marginally more secure than the other. So even though the second password is almost twice as long, because its complexity is lower, it is still weaker than the much shorter password. And although the shorter password looks like it's going to be easy to guess because a lot of the numbers are all the same, the letters are the same. The issue is if a hacker is trying to guess a password, the first thing they're going to do is guess only numbers, and then only numbers in lowercase letters, then only numbers in uppercase letters, then only numbers in lowercase and uppercase letters. And it's going to take them a while to work through every combination until they reach that very short, very sweet password. But the real kicker is even though the second password is twice as long, if we just add one letter, so if we look here, I'm just adding the letter C in the middle, this password goes from being less secure to 10 billion times harder to try to get to. So on the left side, we can see the estimate of how long it would take a hacker to try to figure out what this password is. The shorter password is going to take 8 hours to get into. The longer password is going to take 6 hours to get into. But once you add one letter into it, it goes from 6 hours to 6 million years. So most of us have only been alive for I've been alive for 25 years. I'm assuming most residents are at the Jewish home haven't gone past 100. A few have, but we're talking millions of years. So the chance that a password is going to be breached is almost nothing. But the numbers that I have right here, I want you to be careful because these numbers aren't correct. These numbers are from 2 years ago. This is from the year 2020. If we look at numbers from today, it goes from 8 hours to 40 minutes. So things over the past 2 years have gotten 12 times faster for an attacker to try to figure out what your password is. So we're talking about password security, but the level of security that we need in terms of complexity and length is always increasing as hackers also get more advanced and have more tools available to them. But ultimately, we also need to consider that the uniqueness is the most important thing once again, because even if I have the most unique password, there was a study where we like that password where we said it was going to take 6 million years for somebody to get into. There have been passwords of that length that have been compromised in less than 3 minutes just because it was a password that was used before. And somebody was able to just say, look, this password's here. I don't need to go and spend 6 million years to find it. I can already see it in a list right here that it's been exposed by an attack or a hacker somewhere else. So again, uniqueness is the most important factor, but length and complexity go hand in hand with each other. You don't need to make a password that's impossible to read that looks like hieroglyphics. You can just make a password that's like includes like some common words and then has some numbers and symbols at the end, and that's very secure. And finally, in terms of the security mindset, I want to touch once again on why you shouldn't share your password with strangers. And a lot of people are concerned or have heard that it's bad to write down your passwords, and ultimately that's fine. If somebody's trying to steal your information, there's a very low chance that they're going to try to like go to your house and try to root through all your stuff to find a book of passwords. It's much easier for an attacker to just hope that somebody gives their information to them because they got scammed. And then also, I'd say another good way to store your passwords is with a password manager that will allow you to automatically use your passwords. And also, it makes it so your passwords can be much more complex without you having to remember them or write them down. Because what a password manager does is when you go to sign in to Amazon, for example, it will automatically type the password in for you, which is very convenient. It's very easy to use. And then finally, I know a lot of residents do this, but if you have trouble remembering your passwords, or if you can't find it, if you write it down, but you always end up losing it, I think it's fine to share passwords with your friends and family if you trust them and you know that they're going to keep it safe and they can help you with your passwords. I don't do that myself, but I'd say a lot of residents sometimes will have issues with passwords, and I think that's a fine thing to do. But we're going to talk about now why you shouldn't give your passwords to other people. So if somebody's on the phone or in an email or a text message, or it's like somebody, you don't know them, you don't trust them, but they're saying they're from Microsoft, they're saying they're from Amazon, they're saying they're from the government, those people should not have your password. So they're saying, hey, I need your password to confirm your identity. There's no way for them to have that password, that they should be able to confirm it by hearing you say your password. And this goes back to that allegory to passwords being like keys to a lock. Your password is a key. So the information that you have is the lock. You're trying to unlock it and get that information. If any company that's very reputable and has good security, they're not going to keep a copy of your key, because if they were to get breached, like we talked about before, where people are losing millions of people's information, they don't want to have that happen to them because it makes them liable. They don't want to have that copy of the key available so that all their customers' information gets lost. But what they do have is the lock. They have the lock that's securing all your information. So if you lose your key, like you forget your password, the company can't unlock it for you. What they can do, though, is they can replace the lock. So for the same thing, it would happen with your house. If you lose your house key, you don't have a way to like reproduce it or like figure out how to like create a new copy of the key. What you do is you call a locksmith, and the locksmith can replace the locks and give you a new key to use. But he doesn't have a way to recreate a key that he doesn't know what it's supposed to be. All he knows is that you have a lock, and he can replace the lock for you, which will grant you access again. And that's what changing a password is kind of like. So if Microsoft says, we need your password to get it so that we can like check your account, there's no way for them to do that. So if somebody's asking you for a password over the phone, that's almost a guarantee that that's a scam. They might be asking for like an account number. That should be fine because that's information that's available to the company, but they should not be asking for a password. And I believe that wraps up most of the talk. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. So if anybody has a question to have, or a question they have, they can go ahead and ask it. And Josh, Nelson, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. If I email someone, they already have my email address, don't they?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
So why? And if they can use it to disseminate information to other people, and then like I've been getting spam head over heels for the last 6 months because I think I went on a website I shouldn't have gone on. And now I get like 15, 20, 30 emails a day from all kinds of sites, that come and sign on because you've got $500,000 check that I've got to give you. So how do I, maybe it's probably too late now to do anything because they already have all my email address.
Okay, so this is a little bit different than the password.
Yes,
So
I
what they
realize-
have, what they have is your email address, right?
Right.
So you're correct. There isn't a lot that you can do at this point.
Mhm.
So if you go to a website that has, so a lot of websites do this, like even Google and Amazon and like most websites that you visit,
Mhm.
they make money by giving like people that visit their, like, if you use Gmail, if you use YouTube, if you use Amazon, if they take their customers' information, part of the profit that they make is they can sell that information to advertisers.
No.
And advertisers, obviously, they want to make money by having you buy their product. So they send you emails saying, hey, we have this great deal.
Yeah, right.
But on top of that, malicious people can also act as advertisers because anybody can buy that public information of there's this email address that has an account and they watched a YouTube video or something.
Mhm.
So an evil person can also purchase that list of emails, and also they can send emails to you saying, hey, you have $500,000 you need to claim.
Right.
And that's just as easy for an advertiser to do as it is for an attacker to do. So even though your email is being disseminated, because your password's still safe, that trust and that effectiveness as a security measure is still there. But the spam is something that you will naturally deal with as having an email account on the internet. Does that make sense?
Yes, certainly does. But I guess maybe the only way I can get rid of it is to change my email, right?
I mean, ultimately, yes. But just as like a quick aside, there is a resident that I helped, I want to say 2 weeks ago, who got a new phone, but they also had issues remembering all their passwords.
Mhm.
And so every time they forgot their password, what they would do is they would create a new email address. And I tried to help them out before they had, like, I've helped them recover their original email address. And they had so much spam in it. I believe they had 50,000 emails that they hadn't read, that they decided to say to hell with it, and they got rid of the old email address and went with a new one. But between the 2 weeks of me setting up that email address for them and me going to see them again to help them with something else, they had already gotten another like 500 unread emails, just because that person, when they used their email account, they used it to do shopping, and they would go to like makeup websites, and they would go to websites on like dieting and stuff. And they ended up going, like, triggering so many advertisers and malicious people that they were already getting like 30 or 40, 50 emails a day on a brand new email account that was only a week old.
Oh boy.
So even if you get a new email account, you will be subject to all that spam, and there's already trust attached to your original address. So I think ultimately it's better off if you just stay with your same email account, but you are correct that the only way to get rid of that is to make a new one.
Yeah, well, but I just delete them all, so it's easy to do.
Yeah, that's naturally the response that people have, and you can like trigger it as spam, and over time that will cause it to filter out a little bit. But their attackers are always going to use new email addresses so that they can dodge that spam filter.
Yeah, well, one other point, I'm not sure I'm taking out too much time here, but if you establish an email, a password that's very long and complex, how do you remember it? I mean, because many times you get asked, please include your email, your password to get to a particular site. And if you don't mark them down, how do you remember those ones that are so long and complex with all the high and low capital letters and all the other items? How do you?
Yeah, so that's a good point. And I think a lot of people, what they do is they write it down like on a piece of paper or something, and then they keep it in a place in their house. Or I think the more modern version of that is using a password manager.
Right.
which is like a piece of software that you put on your computer, you put it on your phone, and a lot of like computers come with them built in already. And what that does is it remembers your password for you, and you don't even have to type it in. It will remember the password and it will put it into the website for you so that you don't have to do anything. And one other thing that we can look at is, I believe I'm still sharing my screen here. And I'm just going to bring up a small little comic that I've seen before. So this is just like a comic about password security. And it's talking a little bit how you can make an extremely complex password that uses numbers, it has different capitalization, it mixes it in, and then it has symbols and everything. But ultimately, that password is short. And we talked about this before, where you can have a short password with a high complexity, but it's still similar to longer passwords. But if you just have a password that uses common words, like this one that says correct horse battery staple, that password is going to be more complex. It's going to be harder to guess for an attacker, even though it's just using common like dictionary words. So if you can come up with like passwords that are easy for you to remember based off of like your personal experience or something like that, and then at the end add just like one or two numbers and then an exclamation point or a star at the end or a pound sign, that can make a password that's long, easy to remember, and also easy to put in because it's just you're writing words. You're not putting in like combinations of letters and characters and everything.
Right. Sounds good.
Gotcha. And is there any other questions? Josh, if you want to ask a question, you can. It looks like we might be good here. So unless you have a last second question to ask, we should be good to go. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming and keep up to date with the Institute on Aging at Jewish Senior Life, because again, we're trying to be a hub of knowledge and innovation to promote aspects of positive aging. And have a great Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop this, and you all have a good day.
Goodbye.